Kia ora tātou katoa, ko Naomi Parker tōku ingoa. I'm back in the MC slot for the last couple of sessions of today. Welcome back from lunch. Hope you've had enough food and had lots of great conversations. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next chair for our last speaker session. So I would like to introduce Tracy Brown. Tracy began her career as an agricultural economist in the sheep and beef sector and is now, amongst a number of roles, the chair of Dairy NZ, a director of the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Centre, so one of my many bosses. And Tracy will be the chair for the Activating Mitigation Insights into the Challenges of Adoption session. Over to you, Tracy. Thank you.
Ko raki tapu te maunga, ko tapu ai te awa, ko hokianga te moana, ko te raroa te iwi, ko nai tuputau te hapu, ko Tracy Brown tōku ingoa. Thank you, Naomi, for that lovely introduction. It's probably also worth mentioning, apart from my Dairy NZ NZARG roles, I'm also a farmer first. So I farm with my husband and our family just out of Matamata. Also have deep roots into Northland where I chair a Māori agribusiness up there. So we're really keen interest in this session for a range of reasons. So this session is titled Activating Mitigations, Insights into the Challenges of Adoption. So if you're not already sitting up and taking notice, please do that now. This is a really important session, particularly from a farmer's perspective. This is where the rubber is going to really hit the road in terms of what we need to think about, the actions to maximise adoption of the excellent science, research investment that we've all invested either our time or our money or both into. It will give you some understanding about the levers for change, the tools that we have currently available to us in terms of management practices and other things, while we wait for some science silver buckshot breakthroughs. It's absolutely critical that we get this right for farmers. There will be some gold nuggets in this session. The team have put together an excellent group of speakers. We have an hour. It is another speed dating session. Each of these speakers we could easily have an hour alone with. So without further ado, I'm going to call them up one at a time. So please welcome Malcolm Ellis, Strategy Advisor Fonterra, to the stage. Prior to this, he was General Manager for New Zealand Markets at LIC. Malcolm's very passionate about cow quality, the difference between the top and the bottom quartiles, and I'm sure he'll touch on this. His topic for today is the Fonterra emissions target and a glimpse at some of the opportunity that exists on farms. So Malcolm, please come up to the stage. I'm going to introduce everyone so that we can just flow one to the next. Next, we've got John Roche, Chief Science Advisor at MPI and Director of MPI on Farm Support Services. Previously spent over a decade as Principal Scientist Animal Science at Dairy NZ. His topic is the role of government in supporting farmers to navigate science, policy and market drivers to reduce GHG emissions. Next we have Jason Corsbie, Director at VHC. Jason is a delivery-focused project manager and strategic advisor with a strong record of successful projects across a range of tech and business problems. He has a unique ability to bridge the gap between communications, business and the tech people. So that's really quite a skill. So welcome, Jason. And he will share us some insights around the challenges Māori face when adopting GHG reduction practices, how those insights have informed the development of Mātai Whenua, which is a recently developed digital tool to respond to some of those challenges. Next we have Geoff Simmons, who's the Chief Economist Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. And I hadn't met Geoff until today, but the challenge of how we achieve environmental goals while ensuring our rural communities remain vibrant is dear to my heart as a boots-on-the-ground farmer, and I'm sure it's something you spend much of your day job thinking about. So we're very pleased to have Geoff here. He's had a range of roles, including with the Productivity Commissioner, the UK Home Office, Treasury, and some other things. He has the rather sensitive challenge of talking around or about the topic, the role of land use change in achieving mitigation targets. So thank you for being here, Geoff. And finally, we have Erica van Reenen, who you met in the last session. She's the Managing Director at AgFirst Manawatu Whanganui. She's also the Chair of AgFirst. which is New Zealand's largest and most diverse group of ag and hawk consultancy businesses. Erica is an agribusiness consultant with experience working at the interface of environmental management and farm systems with farmers, industry organisations, processors, government. She's going to give us some broad insights into the challenges and barriers of adoption with the very simple and powerful title of Empowering Farmers. So thank you all for joining us. Erica alluded in the last session whether she had the biggest challenge with 4 farmers or Sinead had the biggest challenge with 7 scientists. I think I've got a pretty big challenge here with 5 very extremely experienced professionals. But there will be significant kudos awarded to those who are able to keep their key messages to the 8 to 10 minutes allotted, so we can maybe just creep a little bit of extra time at the end, because I know there's going to be loads of questions in this session. So let's have Malcolm up to kick us off.
Okay, kia ora tātou. Thanks for that introduction, Tracy. My name is Malcolm Ellis, and it is a pleasure to lead this session out this afternoon on behalf of Fonterra. The session is titled Activating Mitigation and Insights into Challenges and Adoption. My preference is to talk about opportunities, and we will get to those as they exist today. But I will, according to the brief, talk about the challenges and perhaps even issue a challenge. Firstly, though, a bit of reflection. Yesterday, Minister Macleay said a key focus was on growing more food without more emissions. He then linked that desire to the wider aspiration by stating the sector is key to achieving ambition to double the value of exports over the next decade. And a final well-made statement I recorded from the Minister and was later repeated by Wayne McNee was, we are committed to identifying mitigation opportunities that don't unduly negatively impact productivity or profitability on farm. All good stuff, and that final comment related to the identification of future mitigation opportunities. And over these last 2 fantastic days, and they have been great days, we have had some valuable insight into some of the future possibilities. I'm keen to complement that with some of the now opportunities that also exist. And in doing so, please keep some of those day 1 themes I've recorded in mind. Firstly, though, a quick check-in on the key focus and the direction of travel for Fonterra as shared just over a year ago when we announced our key strategic play as it relates to the cooperative's climate roadmap. Oops, go back one. The target has been set to achieve that 30% reduction in on-farm emissions per tonne of fat and protein-corrected milk by 2030 from that 2018 baseline. This is essentially an emissions intensity focused target that primarily focuses heavily on on-farm efficiencies. I'm comfortable with an absolute reduction conversation, and perhaps we can pick that one up in the Q&A, but this target is emissions intensity focused, but it is an and not an or. Over the last 12 months, I've been really pleased with the strength of the narrative that's been built up. We have described this as a sector moment and declared it as being of intergenerational importance. There are 4 key areas, 4 buckets, if you like, that are in front of you there. And in the interest of time, I am going to focus and link, if you like, those first 2. That being the opportunity that exists on farm and the novel future technology. We are heavily focused on the on-farm efficiency piece, that first bucket. Out on farm, we talk about efficiency evolution, and we deliberately use that word evolution out of respect to farmers and recognising the fact that we've been looking to etch out efficiency opportunity on farm for decades, in fact for generations. The challenges, and I describe these with the greatest respect to farmers. I am myself a 4th generation farmer, and Jodie and I are proud Fonterra farm owners. I've got solid red band marks under these trousers, but I do observe in some quarters a degree of complacency. Almost a false sense of comfort that we are the best in the world, and there is a view that tech will save the day. We are good, but let's be on notice, that gap is closing quickly. I want to go to a whistle-stop opportunity tour. These are big focus areas, and I'm going to merely scratch the surface. Let's start with the cow quality and efficiency opportunity. So yesterday I did wonder whether or not Rod Carr had grabbed my notes, and he blew the whistle on the average cow and exposed the difference between good and average cows. Here's the rest of the good oil from those considerations. Effectively, what's in front of us here now, the objective was let's get a good sense and feel about the difference between good and average cows. And effectively, what we've grabbed is the farm a Fonterra supplying farm? Is it Minder subscribing? Does it do 3 or more herd tests? And let's look at the 4 to 8-year-old cows within that set. It gives us a richness of nearly 600,000 cows. Then, with all of those qualifying herds, and George, you'll be nodding there, there'll be many that are, if I think about and role play it with George and Sharon's cows, they will have the same number of cows of the 4 to 8 age group go into each of those quartiles. So it really takes out that location and farm system bias and just allows us to focus on the horsepower. What we find is that top 25% of cows are outstanding, 536 kilograms of milk solids per cow. But we have to own and observe that there's a difference of 165 kilos between top and bottom, and therefore a 44% difference in productivity. I like to talk about production efficiency. And when we take live weight into this account, what we find is that top group of cows are doing an impressive 1.04 kilograms of milk solids per kilogram of live weight, but there is a 0.31 unit or a 42% difference in production efficiency. And then there's a piece that the smart people in the environment team within Fonterra, whom I'm really enjoying working with, model this information in 2023, and a lot of that modelling has now been superseded, but even at that stage, models a significant advantage there. Make no mistake, we have good cows in our industry, but the range as a result of the cow growth years and the repro aspect, which I'll touch on in a moment, means that we have a wide range, and we are breeding from too many of those poorer quality cows. And before I leave this slide, let's talk about emissions intensity, because if I've got 2 cows that weigh 500 odd kilos and one is doing 165 kilos more, then let's talk about emissions intensity. It's pretty simple there. To repro. In my 30 years of farming, my learnings have been extensive, but top of the list is that there's more money in a milking cow than a dry cow. Not even John Roche has been able to debate that with me. And essentially, looking at this summary slide in some respects of the repro opportunity, we look at the fact that since we've been measuring the key stat, repro stat of 6-week in calf rate, we've been largely stuck at that 66, 67, sorry, I'm hitting the next slide, there we go, 66, 67% 6-week in calf rate. The top 25% of farmers are achieving 78. But the key here is if we were to move that metric from 67 to 72 and have the corresponding positive impact of lowering the not in calf rate, extra discretionary culling, ability to cull on disease, improved herd quality and reduced replacement rate, we have the opportunity to improve productivity on farm by 17 kilos of milk solids per cow across all cows, not just the ones that are calving a little earlier, and 2.9% CO2 equivalents per kilogram of milk solids. And I remind that our on-farm target is 7% reduction from on-farm efficiencies, so 2.9 is essentially 41% of that target. The other point that I would make here is that if you look across the last 8 years, the top 25% of farmers have a 6-week in calf rate that is 19.6% superior to the lower 25%, the bottom 25%. And there is an 8.7% difference in not in calf rate. May I ask the question whether we spend too much time in the industry talking about the average? We talk about the average 6-week in calf rate, the average not in calf rate, we talk about the average cost of production. But when we look at the top 25%, there is a lot for us to glean and to learn. Again, in this slide, let's talk about emissions intensity. I've got 2 500-kilo cows and one's now calving earlier. I end up with more days in milk, more milk solids, and the advantage thereof. And then finally, opportunity sits at the top of all of these. This followed a conversation I had with Mr. Roche a couple of years ago. We talked about the system creep over time. There's a bit up here, right? But essentially what this is, it is the trends of New Zealand dairy cattle feeds as prepared for MPI by Dairy NZ and is released annually, and this is from the report in May 2024. It looks at that significant change in farm system over time nationally, and then I'm going to, just in the interest of time, focus only on one region, and that being my own up in the Waikato. So what we have seen is a significant change in farm system, but a levelling out of feed input per cow. This is introduced feed input per cow, picks up brassicas, purchased feed, homegrown maize silage and the likes. The only thing it doesn't pick up from a supplementary feed perspective is home conserved pasture silage. What I want to look now then is at the Waikato. Now I can remember going to a discussion group in the 90s, and I spent most of my time on the way home trying to figure out the farm we'd visited was feeding a tonne of dry matter per cow. I couldn't believe it, a tonne. How do you get a tonne of dry matter in per cow? You roll forward to 2013 and 14, the Waikato was averaging 940. There'd certainly been some significant changes over that time. But what I want to do is I want to have a look at that time between the peak and the last couple of years. And it's important that you take a 3-year average because you could be comparing a very good season to the mother of all droughts, and so you've got to wash that out with a multiple year comparison. If I do that, what I observe is that there has been a 23.4% reduction in feed input per cow, which is 1 in every 4 kilos has been taken out. The stocking rate is a dead heat according to the dairy stats, 2.87 v 2.88. 23.4% less feed, and yet the production has gone up 8%. This tells me one of only 2 things has happened here. One, and having spent 12 years at LIC, including in the breeding scheme, I'm adamant the cows a decade later are better than the cows a decade before. But the other thing is we must own that there's clearly been a lot of pasture substitution going on. And let's talk emissions intensity, because if we've got embedded emissions in a tonne of dry matter of homegrown pasture and we've got embedded emissions in a tonne of introduced feed and we're taking 23% of it out and still doing more production, let's talk emissions intensity. There is real opportunity for us sitting in some of these spaces of my whistle-stop opportunity tour. So let's close this out. We're good at dairy, but we can and need to be constantly striving to be better. I have no doubt the future will deliver innovative solutions, but while we wait, let's turn up the dial on the now opportunities. I want the future solutions to be applied to an efficient, strong, reproductive performing national herd that has optimum feed utilisation and efficiency. I want us to have our cake and eat it too. We need to visualise coming up for a breath in 2030, and farmers are more efficient and more profitable on farm, and Fonterra has achieved its emissions intensity targets. For me, that is like turning over the double word score. The scientists of the last couple of days talk about stackability. I've just introduced the double word score. That is the moment where we get the maximum or the optimum out of what we're currently doing, and then we bring the future and novel technology across the top. My glass in dairy has been 7/8 full the whole time I've been involved in the industry. I worried a few years ago we were waiting for the regulation to come down the line. A primary focus on emissions intensity is a massive step forward, and I'm very proud of Fonterra for that. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, tēnā koutou, ko te kai tohatoa mātanga puta a mātua, me te pauwhakahere ki te mahi aha whenua, ki te manatua aha mātua, ko Crocon toka manga, ko Maine toka awa, ko Norman, ko Celt, ko Irish o ko iwi, ko County Kerry toka hapu, ko John Roche toka ingoa. Te iwa korja, is as erin me, is as kunti kiri, an riocht, ballion apel agus creen a heron me, Sean the Roche de senam dum. Good afternoon, everyone. Look, it's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Hate following the master, but someone's got to, I suppose. Great presentation. Thanks, Malcolm. I think it opens up the door beautifully for some discussion later. Look, I was given a title, which I thought was a pretty cool title, but then I saw the title of the session that we were in. I thought that's much better title. So I said, I might talk about that, and then talk about government's role in that, and probably still close off that title. Look, Naomi might disagree now, but she asked me to be provocative, and asking an Irishman to be provocative is always dangerous. It's always dangerous. Hey, so look, I'm gonna try and be provocative. If I offend any of you, I apologize in advance. But I've got one word for you: introspection. If you see me in if you see yourself in some of the criticisms, then maybe you need to take a look at what you're doing. And if that doesn't work, I've got a bottle of concrete tablets here, and I'll hand them out afterwards. All right, so I want to look at the present state of the extension effort, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about change management. We're talking about behavior change. So in my opinion, and that is all it is, we've got a lack of leadership. So one of my farmer friends and mentors challenged me 15 years ago, and he asked me, are you giving farmers the advice they want or the advice that they need? And I see way too many people providing the advice that the farmers want rather than the advice that they need. We see unpopular messages or messages that are going to lead to some level of angst in discussion being either diluted or omitted. We've got disengaged farmers. And there's multiple reasons for that, and I don't subscribe to know them all, but I'll tell you some of them. They're no longer at the center of the extension efforts. They're being told what to do. They're not being asked how we will solve these problems. And so we're seeing attendance at events that have gone from several thousand to several hundred to several in my lifetime. And I know there's a lack of hair on the top of my head, but that life hasn't been that long to see that transition away from farmers. We see multiple sources of the truth, and this is in every walk of life, obviously, but is here in agriculture as well. So we've got confusion. We've got a clan mentality where people subscribe to the news that suits their biases, and it entrenches them, and they clan together around those news items. And look, we've got a private sector that is run off their feet. We don't have enough advisors out there. We don't have enough good advisors out there. And those that are out there are literally run off their feet, and their ability to stay current with science and current with technological developments is limited because of that. So that's the present state of extension offering in my opinion. Now, I'm a little bit of a history buff. If I didn't do science, I'd have done history. I'd probably have earned even less, but anyway. And so I want to take you on just a whistle-stop tour of the extension, the history of modern-day extension. Now, I'm sure the pharaohs had people advising them on how to grow wheat on the banks of the Nile 3,000 years ago. So I'm talking about modern-day extension, which began, as far as I can see, in the 1840s when the English government sent out itinerant advisors to Ireland to try and convince us not to grow the potato anymore. In 1847, when all the seed potatoes were dead, it was a kind of a redundant effort. But we did grow some cabbages and turnips and stuff like that instead of it. So, and we've seen the extension service develop out of that. We've also seen farmers and their level of formal education change over that period of time, from very few people were educated at the start of the 19th century, to a limited amount of education in the second half of that, to primary school education, secondary school education becoming free in New Zealand in the second decade of the 20th century, through to tertiary and polytech educated farmers right throughout the community of farmers that we deal with now. So a huge change from those old days of itinerant advisors going out to talk to people that had no formal education, to many of the farmers being more qualified and more educated than the people that are out there now providing advice to them. We've also seen changes on where farmers actually get their advice, from peer-to-peer learning, because there was nothing else. Many of them weren't able to read, even if there was anything else in the early part of this timeline, but there was nothing else. There was no books, there was no magazines until we headed into the second half of the 20th century. But one thing that was consistent and has remained consistent and is still consistent through time is farmers learn from peer-to-peer learning. We've also seen changes, subtle changes, I would argue, in our extension offering over that period of time, from, as I said, the itinerant lecturers that traversed Ireland in the 1840s, through to government programs, and the knowledge extension out of the university system, the establishment of experimental stations, and Department of Ag advisors. And if we look at what I would argue was the golden age of agricultural productivity, and therefore the golden age of agricultural extension, if you take that by logical extension, pardon the pun. We had farmer-led discussion groups, we had government advisors and sector advisors, and we had government science, and they worked inherently well together. What have we got since the reforms of the 1980s? We've got centrally directed discussion groups, we've got sector advisors, sector research, and we've got what I'm calling a massive disconnect between farmers and science. So when the government had an advisory service, what did we have? I thought you had stopped me talking, Naomi. It wasn't moving forward. We had the ability of the government to nudge. So farmers understood, because their advisors were connected to policy people, the policy people were connected overseas, we understood the risks that were coming from foreign governments. We understood the risks that were coming from market expectations, and therefore farmers had time to plan the change. They knew what was coming, and farmers are the innovators. You don't need a long history in New Zealand to understand that. We had direct feedback from farmers, and so our policies were far more robust, they were far more pragmatic, and therefore change was more implementable. We had a strong connection between farmers and science, and by default, between farmers and scientists. We had an advisor sitting in the middle between the scientist and the farmer, talking to the farmers about the science that they were talking with the scientists about, and telling the scientists what the farmers had told them about their science. And even when I started at DRC in '99, this was really, really strong. We had farmers coming in 2 days before the Ruakura Farmers Conference to sit through our presentations, tell us when we were bullshitting, tell us when we were using our language was too technical and how it should be said. We had that level of connection. That, in my opinion, has all been lost in the last 20 years. So we had an agricultural sector that was the envy of the world, and farmers were better supported in a response. And what I've learned in my short time in MPI is when people are well supported in a response, recovery begins the day the response happens, and people come out of it much more quickly. Now, this wasn't meant to be a melancholy, downtrodden trip down memory lane. And I don't know if John Kennedy is right here, actually, because I never checked up to see whether the Chinese for crisis is composed of two characters, one meaning opportunity. But I thought it was a good one. So what's the government's role in this? To circle back to the question I was asked. So I have the privilege of being the Director of On-Farm Support Services. 2.25 years ago, the Director General asked me if I would do it till Christmas. And the classic rookie mistake, I never asked him which Christmas, so I'm still here as we head into Christmas. Look, I do genuinely mean it's a privilege, because it is a privilege to work with brilliant people, and it's a privilege to work with the vision that we've got, which is to support farmers and growers to continue, and I stress to continue, to be successful in a changing world. And when I went out to hire my regional managers, I was looking for 4 characteristics. 1, a big brain. 2, a small ego. And as most of you would know, I couldn't have given myself one of these jobs. 3, recognition that change was needed and change was imminent. This wasn't debatable. But 4th, that this wasn't easy. And I'm really delighted to see a group of farmers having spoken to you guys beforehand, because quite often we sit in these rooms and talk amongst ourselves as to how can we get farmers to change, as if they don't know how to change themselves. So it's really, really good to have that level of insight. And what we're trying to do in on-farm support, I'm not saying we've got it right, I'm not putting myself on a pedestal here, but we're trying to put the farmer back at the center of everything we do. So whether that's catchment groups, or that's workshops, or that's discussion groups, or field days, we are trying to seek that position from the farmer. What is needed to change here, and how do we do that? One of the other things we're doing is we've started an initiative called Science for Farmers. A number of you will be involved in this with us. We've got a number of partners, NZACC, AgriZero, Manaki Whenua, Massey University, LIC, and Ag Research in this year's cohort, and that is growing, and it has got massive traction. The name has got massive currency even. And so we're going to lean in even harder in this and see how we can help around the country getting science back out on farms. MPI funds a huge amount of science. But one of the challenges we've got is that we tend to think of extension, and I'm using we as the royal we, but we think of extension as providing information. And that's not how you get change. And we talk about changing farmers as if farmers are some homogenous group of people that we can just provide information to and they will all change along that way. Farmers are probably more heterogeneous than the vast majority of communities that I actually work with. And of course, when you look across the generational differences that we see right throughout our communities, we see those in farmers as well. For those of you that haven't read The Fourth Turning, well worth a read, where it talks about the generational shift and the repeat in generations over 100 years so that we can actually learn from the past. But all of these generations have different perspectives. They have different core values. They have different perspectives on climate change. And that is important because the man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. We need to engage with where they're at in their journey and bring them forward on that journey with us. And how to get their information is all different as well. So, and look, we often think that these guys in the middle are our farmers. You know, the Gen X's, my generation, the last generation, the nomads, the Gen Ys, that these are the farmers. But you know, the boomers, the governance group, the older generation are still very heavily influential in farming. And the oldest members of Gen Z are 19, 20 years of age, are now coming into our industry. So we are spanning across these 4 generational archetypes, and it's really important that we cater to them. So just to bring it home, and hopefully I have done that in 10 minutes. Ooh, yeah, close enough. So a couple of take-home points. Look, in my opinion, and as I said, it always is my opinion, the current extension model is missing the mark. We've got highly educated farmers, we've got multiple sources of the truth, and we've got farmers disengaged from the system, and yet our extension model hasn't changed much in 140 years. Government has a role here. Recognition of the importance of and the challenges facing the sector is critical. It is really, really interesting when I talk to farmers about how do we double export value? How do we make those changes inside the farm gate? One of the key things I get is you need to tell people how important the sector is. We know how important the sector is. So let's keep telling people that. We need support for farmer-led change. And one of the great things there, I think, is catchment groups. And again, I have the privilege of leading that out for MPI. And I think it is a fantastic initiative. It's communities back at the center of decision-making around things. Funding for relevant R&D and having a trusted coaching presence to coordinate messaging both directions, out from government to farmers and from government back into farmers. And look, I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks, Tracy.
Kia ora tātou. My name's Jason Corsbie and I'm a director at Digital Experience and User Experience Consultancy here in Wellington called VHC. And I never expected that my career path would lead me to presenting to you guys today, but it's an absolute privilege, and it's a privilege to be sharing the stage with the other panel members. In close partnership with NZACC's Toiho Māori Advisory Board, VHC have worked to research, design and develop a digital tool that aims to help educate, engage and activate Māori landowners, Māori farmers and their whānau to empower them to make decisions towards reducing agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. Approximately 5% of Aotearoa is Māori freehold land under collective Māori ownership. Māori landowners face a unique set of structural challenges that make it more difficult to access and use agricultural greenhouse gas emissions information to make decisions that could reduce emissions. Guided by a need that the Toiho members felt needed to be addressed, our project has sought to understand the significance of whenua Māori to different people, how people engage with information about agricultural greenhouse gases, what drives them, and the barriers of turning this information into action. Our hypothesis was pretty simple. If we make data and information about reducing greenhouse gas emissions more accessible and understandable, then people are more likely to be empowered to act to reduce their emissions. There is already a wealth of great information about emissions reduction available out in the world. If we can map this to a specific user need and context, then they'll be more likely to take action. The first phase of the project consisted of 2 work streams. Desktop research to catalogue and contextualise what data, tools, case studies, research and information is already out there. No reinventing the wheel. Over the course of 6 months, we catalogued, tagged and contextualised over 2,500 resources, and we're still finding new resources every day. We have found fantastic information and stories relating to emissions reduction decision making that are not getting the reach and audience that it should. We also conducted user research to understand people's beliefs, behaviours, needs, motivations and barriers relating to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Robust user research and user testing is critical to a successful digital tool. gives us the foundation of user needs and principles we can design digital solutions for. We conducted interviews, group workshops, farm visits and consultations across the motu, as well as online with over 50 participants. Our target and primary audience were Māori landowners, whānau Māori landowners, Māori farmers, kaitiaki and decision makers of whenua Māori. However, people don't just wear one potai, and many participants also belong to secondary audiences of Crown agencies, industry, specialists and consultants as well, and as a result we were able to capture multiple perspectives from individuals. Specifically, we sought to understand what does whenua Māori mean to people, how do people engage about greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and what motivates them to engage with that information and act on it, and what stops them. What we learn may not be surprising to many people here today. Most people don't really care about greenhouse gas emissions. But why don't people care about this? Reducing emissions is not a priority. Whānau needs are the immediate focus. People are disconnected from the effects of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. The existential threat of climate change is scary and overwhelming, and too abstract to meaningfully take into account in decision making. People find it hard to see how it connects to the things they do care about, like their whānau, their awa, their whenua, their taiao, and the profitability and sustainability of their business. People want choice. They want to make their own decisions and mistakes in their own time, in their own way, accountable to themselves and their whānau. Dictating solutions without understanding people's context is disrespecting the mana they hold with their connection to whenua and uri. We heard that people who have established relationships with Crown agencies and partners are more able to access the right scientific and economic data and information to navigate Western investment systems. This results in an unbalanced and inequitable access to information. However, even if there was more balanced access, it won't necessarily make it matter to people. You have to care about something before you're even going to go looking for it and engage with it. And even if people cared, they would find it hard to act because a lot of the information is complex and overwhelming. People are at vastly different stages, and the journey to taking emissions reduction action isn't a straight road. People's desire and purpose for taking action comes from different places and is individualised. There are multiple different pathways they can take to achieve the same outcome. We need to respect the fact that people are on the journey, even if they are not at the destination yet. We found that there's a very clear common trait that was identified in people who are taking action. They understand how everything is interconnected. They understand how the health of the whenua and the awa is critical to their business. They understand how climate change will impact this. They understand that they can use their enterprise as an enabler for taking action, and this will ultimately improve their enterprise and whānau outcomes. There is also a misalignment between how people think about data and information and how data providers think about it. People who are taking action interpret the whenua and what's happening on it, like when the eel are running, through a lens of their own mātauranga, and it tells them what they need to know to make decisions. So our original hypothesis was wrong, but we kept going. Our solution needs to address the connection issue. How can we connect emissions reduction action to the things that people care about? Our user research gave us some clear design principles we needed to adhere to as we went forward into design, prototyping and user testing. Number one, reflect non-linear journeys. If we show people a linear journey, they will switch off because they can't see themselves in it, and we won't be servicing the right information at the right time. Secondly, we need to balance the domains between whenua, enterprise and climate, and acknowledge that these are all important and not in conflict. We've heard that many of the findings from our research apply to all landowners and farmers, not just Māori. We need to unashamedly design for a Māori audience, but know that we are not excluding anyone from finding value in the tool. Our user journey in the tool needs to enable anyone to come in at any step and find value. Users can explore information and see how things are connected. They can reflect on what they've learned and share it with others. They can use the information to plan and act, taking whatever step is right for their emissions reduction journey. The result is Mātai Whenua, a tool that brings together thousands of resources from trusted stakeholders, many of you here today, across our three domains of whenua, enterprise and climate. Resources include science and research, geospatial data, tools and calculators and case studies. We've worked with subject matter experts in Māori agribusiness to encode the connection between domains and topics, to digitise how a trusted advisor thinks when providing support for landowners and farmers. This unlocks pathways to information that would not normally be accessed and provides gentle reminders that emissions reduction action can be connected to users' aspirations for their whenua, whānau and business. The Explore function in the tool is the entry point for the tool and provides the user with an endless canvas of trusted information that enables them to navigate on their own terms and discover resources that align with their aspirations and interests. Or, if a user knows what they're looking for, our powerful search function can surface up information from multiple locations and sources. We've gone the extra step of contextualising the resources. Some of them are really useful, but aren't always accessible for non-technical audiences who don't always know how it fits into their world. Once a user understands what a resource is about, they can access it directly via a link to the data or content provider's website. Users can also access video case studies and geospatial data directly from Mātai Whenua. Once they've clicked on a resource, we'll show them a bunch more connected stuff, directly and indirectly related to what they've clicked on. This enables those pathways to be opened up that might not always be explicit or obvious when thinking about a domain or topic, including pathways to emissions reduction. This is still an overwhelming space, so we want to give people the chance to think about information, reflect on it, and come back to it in their own time. Your kete is a place where you can save information, building up an individualised library of useful resources and data, and share it with others to inform conversations. We think this has value for the wider ecosystem as a channel for getting research and information and data to people making changes on the ground. We think that it's key for supporting programs like the extension programs from MPI. The Mātai Whenua ecosystem will then connect this information to audiences that would not normally think about searching for this information directly, increasing reach and impact and removing some of the silos around information that currently exist. The ability to save and share information from your kete can foster great collaboration across regions and catchments, as well as research institutes, government agencies, and industry bodies. Better analytics are also available via Mātai Whenua. Currently, information providers can only see how information has been used relative to other information that they've produced. But in the Mātai Whenua ecosystem, you can see this and user behaviour compared across the whole body of knowledge, potentially unlocking surprising connections and pathways driven by what users are actually finding valuable. It's been an incredible team effort to get this far in the project, and we're really excited about getting Mātai Whenua live in the next couple of months. This work's been possible thanks to our user research participants who generously shared the korero and time with us and helped shape and build the direction of the tool. And in addition, we'd like to thank Toiho and NZACC, Envy Interactive and Mita Creative for their partnership, support and mahi over the last 18 months. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, ko Geoff Simmons toka wingua. I'm not a farmer, but I have two uncles who are, so I'll be spending all of Christmas Day hearing why everything I'm about to tell you is bullshit. So our work at the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment has focused on land use change. So the report's called Going with the Grain. It's on the internet. You can look for far more detail there. But land use change is one way that we can actually reduce emissions. There are parts of the country, the basic thrust of the report is that there's parts of the country where if we're going to meet our environmental goals, mitigation of existing land uses will not be enough and we will need land use change. It's the most complex and challenging topic, way to reduce emissions, we acknowledge, but it needs to be part of the mix going forward. And, you know, this work has taught us a few lessons about the challenges of adoption, which I'll briefly go through. So my first point is that adoption of any change is complex. You know, farms are complex systems. Change is costly, and climate isn't the only environmental issue facing farmers. I think Jason just covered that. You know, that really sits with a Te Ao Māori perspective. You'll be shocked to know that the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment can even acknowledge that environmental issues aren't the only issues facing farmers either. Gosh. But in order to make the long-term and large-scale investments that are required, farmers are looking for win-wins across domains, or at least they need to be sure that what they're doing in one area doesn't cause problems somewhere else further down the line, DCDs. In our view, the best way to do this, the best way to achieve this is for the government to provide good quality public information as a public good for everyone to make decisions, for regional councils to work with local communities to understand the environmental challenges in those catchments, and then to empower those communities, as John was saying, perhaps through catchment groups, to find local solutions. That's what we think is the way forward for environmental issues regarding land use. I don't know about you, but when I look at that graph, I think, wow, incentives are really important, but that might be because I'm an economist. The vast majority of New Zealand's methane comes from agriculture, and emissions have been relatively stable over the last decade or two. But this masks a massive shift between the contribution of sheep and dairy cattle. So dairy emissions have risen due to good market returns. Sheep emissions have fallen due to land use change due to dairy and forestry. And that's also driven partly by market returns, but also partly by the emissions trading scheme. Total emissions are predicted in the last emissions reduction plan, if you didn't see. They're predicted to fall this decade, even without a price or incentives around methane, because of sheep land continuing to convert to forestry. This assumes that dairy emissions will not resume rising. So it's important to note that incentives are important to encourage the adoption of emissions reduction technology. The government will have to consider how any new incentives, like a price, interact with existing ones, like the ETS, and I'll come back to that later. Malcolm's really covered this, so I won't redo it in detail. But the literature suggests that around 10% of emissions can be reduced without impacting profits at all from within pastoral farming. That's quite a substantial potential impact, and I would argue that incentives could help speed that impact to be taken up. There's also low methane genetics available for sheep, but again there's no incentive to take that up. This is all potential that could be emissions that could be reduced before we even get into the potential of technological innovation in this space. So incentives, even in the absence of a new technology, would not be a tax. There are things that people can do right now. The key barrier to adoption of a lot of these practices is skills, and both Malcolm and John have talked about that. So if one is being charitable, then this is a case for investing in training and on-farm support, as John was saying. If one isn't being charitable and is being taking a really hard economic line, you'd have to ask, in what industry are those with low skills exempted from market forces? Pause for effect. Back to the ETS. And this will calm your blood pressure down a little bit. Based on our modelling in two catchments around New Zealand, a methane price and the ETS combined together could, depending on market conditions, lead to rapid declines in sheep farming, removing it entirely from some catchments, and leaving only a handful of the most profitable operators in the most well-suited parts of the country. In our view, obviously, I agree with most people who think that this is a problem, but I don't think the problem here is a potential price on methane or incentives around the take-up of technologies. For me, the main problem is the inclusion of unlimited forestry offsets in the emissions trading scheme. And we have, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment has talked about this a lot. So the ETS essentially means that instead of reducing fossil fuel emissions like we should, we are instead focused on reducing net emissions by paying people to plant essentially pine trees on our landscape. Carbon dioxide has an extremely long residence time, which for all practical purposes is permanent on any timescale we think we can manage. How can we guarantee that forestry will be permanent in a similar way? I have nothing against commercial forestry, but I don't believe that that this incentive, the emissions trading scheme, is leading to land uses that go with the grain of the landscape, or as some people might say, the right tree in the right place. It's also creating a massive future liability for future generations that will have to maintain these stocks of carbon, which are supposedly locked away forever. By contrast, as a short-lived gas, methane is well suited to offsetting with forestry, and it would retain everything, all the trade-offs within the land-based sectors. If methane emissions are reduced in the future, then the land could immediately be repurposed. You reduce the emissions, you reduce the amounts of trees. We're not locking things up forever like we are with fossil fuel offsets. In our view, an ETS for methane would be far more appropriate and would allow the agricultural sector to make up any difference between the emissions reductions that can be achieved on farm and the targets, whatever those may be set. And don't we all wait with bated breath to find out what that will be. Our office is surprised that farmers stand by and allow fossil fuel polluters to have access to a mitigation option that not only permanently removes productive land, but also is really cutting their grass, to use a very bad pun, by using an offset which is actually far better suited to the sorts of gases we are talking about here today. And before, I know you're all eager to hear from Erica, so I'll hand over in just a moment. Just to make a point around incentives, that doesn't necessarily mean a price, that doesn't necessarily mean that all the money goes into the general coffers. Incentives can be arranged in ways, just to hat tip to the beef and lamb report, incentives can be arranged in ways which generates revenue that is going back to good stuff happening on farm. Thanks.
I'm just waiting for the thing to do its thing that I have no control over, which I just love. Thank you, team. Tēnā koutou anō. I learned a valuable lesson recently. I was doing an empathy exercise as part of a project I'm involved with. We had to come up with an example of something that annoys us and then really drill down into that. The day before provided the perfect example when I had been asked for about the 2000th time in my career why farmers cannot get credit for the carbon stored in grass. I can see the collective eye roll in the room. In all likelihood, I responded to the farmer with an eye roll or equivalent gesture on my face, which those of you that know me will know I do well. My contempt was not actually directed at the farmer who asked the question, rather the fact that I've been answering that question for over 15 years, and that's still where we're at. Unfortunately, the farmer wasn't telepathic and would not have understood that my contempt was coming from there. And while I respectfully answered the question, I'm sure he felt somewhat belittled for asking it. Farmers, like the rest of us, and like John has said, are completely overwhelmed with information, and mis and disinformation for that matter. They're not living and breathing this stuff like most of the people in this room. It is completely understandable that while they may have at some point in their life had the answer or the scientific elements to answer it, they could be forgiven for not having it front and centre at that very moment. Not only are they overwhelmed with information, the competition for their attention is also increasing. And humans' ability to hold attention is still limited by biology. I'm pretty sure husbands' lines are a little lower on this graph. Mine certainly is, only when the wife is asking for more things. As the challenge of climate change and responding to it gains in complexity, we have a responsibility to ensure we are providing information in a way that is consistent, simple, and practical. We need to respectfully meet farmers. I'm really worried that I'm agreeing twice now with John. We need to respectfully meet farmers where they are at. And we may need to do this at least 2,000 times, and that's okay, because they are asking questions, and understanding the why is a crucial first step towards taking action. So we need to listen and then lead. Increasingly, I am coming across farmers, like the ones we heard from this morning, who are wanting to be part of the solution but have very limited options in where they can turn for support. This was highlighted for me a few weeks ago in a Teams call with the Mid-Taieri Greenhouse Gas Collective, who you've already heard from with Emma. They're a group of a dozen farmers who are working together to tackle the challenge of reducing gross emissions while remaining financially viable as a collective, as part of the Future Farm Systems program funded by the NZACC. And I will note here the very critical point about these collectives that you've heard mention of is that they are farmer-led. It is not us telling them what to do, they lead the solutions. The group had a really robust discussion about where to next. They've been working together for a couple of years now, developing their understanding, challenging, testing ideas, and have ambitious goals in one of the toughest farming environments in New Zealand to change much. But they are still deeply committed. With limited options, they've recognised that to remain viable, they need to look at how to replace lost income if or when they need to reduce stock numbers, even if only for a period while technology catches up. Every corner they turn, they're hitting brick walls. The collective frustration was high, and it's difficult not to feel helpless in supporting the next steps. But I'll note that about half of them are either here or online, so they are still very committed. So where do they turn? Regulatory signals are unlikely in the near term. Industry bodies are working hard to ensure a price is not part of the equation, but are not providing a lot of other avenues for those who are wanting to voluntarily act in the meantime. There is some recognition by the banks, but this is mixed, and to make a meaningful difference often requires significant scale. Some processes are starting to provide benefits. Again, this is mixed, and often focus on net and/or intensity emissions. Arguably, as food producers, we need to focus on intensity as well as gross. But the ultimate arbitrator, the planet, is desperate for gross reductions. What might help here is targeted, effective collaboration focused on information. A farmer-centric approach that supports farmers and land managers with information they need to make a difference, where information is considered in a farm systems context, a te taio context, where they can understand opportunities and risks of different markets, the voluntary and the regulatory, where they are supported to make long-term decisions around land use while also remaining viable in the short term. This would also support them with adaptation and potentially creates greater opportunity for a collective response. It potentially also provides a structure for financial recognition, as Richard spoke of this morning. It would need to consider different decision makers and ownership structures at the farm level and recognise the unique aspects of this for whenua Māori. The approach would require bridges and connectors to enable farmers to access information in the system that they can work within, and potentially shifts farmers from doing the least at the last minute to maximising the opportunity by doing something. We need to collaborate where it makes sense to do so in a meaningful, targeted way, focused on supporting those who want to change to make the best decisions to do that. We're too focused on an all or nothing approach, to price or not to price. This means farmers can miss opportunities to take action and be recognised for that. It also means that we get further and further away from the goal and potentially push a greater burden on the next generation. This is creating division in our communities, it's pipping industries against each other, and the majority of attention is focused on politics and policies, which have changed nearly every election since the Kyoto Protocol was signed. New Zealand farmers deal with uncertainty all the time, and most understand that the world is becoming less certain, not more. But when the options to act are limited, and most come at a cost, politics becomes an easy reason to not act yet. The primary sector has successfully fought hard against regulation since the Climate Change Response Act came into force in 2002. And as a farmer, while I appreciate not having additional taxes or costs in my business, I also understand that the magnitude of the stick, if we continue to do nothing, is likely to be significant. Making a little bit of progress over the years may have had us in a very different position right now. Even when we have a suite of mitigation options available, and I'm super optimistic about that, there are still a significant number of barriers to overcome to achieve rapid uptake. The first major and obvious one being cost, with practicality coming a close second. We know that there are a number of farming practices that could, arguably should, be implemented on farms that would improve productivity and profitability that have been around for decades, and yet there is still a stubbornly high number of farmers that don't take them up, which keeps consultants like me in business, happily. We therefore need to continue to look at a wide-ranging approach that technology is one part of to achieve the level of reductions needed to meet our obligations. As I've outlined, there are an increasing number of farmers, such as George and Emma, such as Ken and the trusts he represents, such as the Mid-Tyree Group, and plenty of others who want to be part of the solution. To be part of the solution, they still need to exist. Our job, our collective job, is to enable these leading farmers to do that and show the rest what it can look like while enabling them to look after their families, communities and landscapes in the process. By working with the willing and eating the elephant one bite at a time, we will make progress. E hara takutoa e te toa takitahi, he toa takitini. My strength is not as an individual, but as a collective. Ngā mihi nui ki koutou katoa.
How's that? Really nice intro and a really nice platform for us to launch into some questions. So I'm just going to go straight into a couple of gnarly ones for Malcolm and John, because I know you guys will cope with it. But Malcolm, what part has Fonterra played in the complacency amongst farmers? A key message regularly put out is that New Zealand is the most efficient milk producers in the world.
I wondered if... How's that? Yep. I wondered if that might happen if I made that statement. Look, at the end of the day, I just want to be really clear that, as I described, it is with real respect to farmers as a collective. I mean, we've met George Moss today, we've met Emma, there are the Browns, there are so many farmers out there that are at the cutting edge of efficiency and performance and profitability on farm. I guess the point I'm making is that I worry about the number that are somewhat just disenfranchised because they kind of go, it's just too big, it's just too bigger. Or I hear, I've only got either the tech solution's going to come along, or I've actually only got a few years to go. And what I really love, because I'm a fourth generation farmer and our son's coming home to the farm next year, and I love being able to say to someone who says that it's like, so do we not worry too much about Jimmy or Jean that are the next generation to come home to your farm? So, I think that the role that Fonterra plays now is to really, you talked about leadership, John. I feel that by acknowledging that the front of this needs to be a focus, the primary focus needs to be emissions intensity, but we need to own the responsibility about absolute reduction, and we need to really lead in the fact that now there is an intergenerational sector moment that secures the future for the sector. I'm really grateful for that. And I think that's the sort of energy and that's the sort of edge that we need in this conversation now.
Thanks, Malcolm. Now, the next question's for John, which I'll be interested in your response. What's the role of the sector bodies in all of this?
Can I throw that one back to you, Tracy? Look, the sector bodies have a huge role in this. One of the massive strengths of New Zealand is our cooperative structure, and I mean cooperative in the loosest possible. I don't necessarily mean in terms of corporate structure. And what I was describing in terms of the golden age of agricultural productivity here in New Zealand, and again, I admit it's only my opinion, but that was when we had a massive level of cooperation across all of our sectors and certainly down through our sectors. And I think some of the changes of the 1980s and early 1990s, and they coincided in terms of sector deregulation or changes to regulation and changes to science regulation, led to that lack of coordination or less coordination. So, sorry, I'll make it really quick. I think the sector bodies have a huge role to play, and I just again encourage that leadership. Leadership's not easy. Just remember, leadership is a decision. It's not a position. You either decide to lead or you decide to follow. And I agree with Malcolm, and I do applaud Fonterra, and I'm absolutely stoked that they poached this man off LIC to actually do it. This is leadership, and I think the sector is doing a fantastic job. We've seen a turn. AgriZero is another classic example. A bunch of our sector-leading organizations fronting up serious cash at a time when they were getting serious criticism. They took it on the chin. And so, yeah, I'm not worried about this. I think we've seen a sea change in attitude right across our sectors. So let's not beat ourselves up too much. Let's actually stand upright and walk forward together.
Thanks, John. And there is no doubt that the levy bodies have a key role to play in all of this. And we've been reorganising ourselves with our new strategy, particularly with GNZ. But we see one of the key ways forward in this is actually going to be partnerships, and how do we actually work together as sector organisations, really leverage the investment and get the best results for farmers. So I've got a question for you, Jace. How do we access mātai whenua? And are you building generative AI capability into it?
Wow, you promised me no direct questions. Mātai whenua we're just working through with the solutions built, but I mentioned earlier 2,500 resources to load up and link to. It's taking a bit of time, so we're hoping to get it live early in the new year. We really see this as a bridge where we're using some AI in terms of how we run the search across Mātai whenua. But I think one of the issues that we've always had with AI is that we've got Google at one end, where people are sort of directly trying to find resources that are out there. We've got AI, which still has a lot of trust issues. You don't necessarily know where that information's coming from. And we sort of see Mātai whenua as a bridge in that gap, where we've collated all those resources. We've gone through an approval process to say this is a trusted resource, you can use it. And then we're using AI to surface up that information at the right time within that closed ecosystem. So certainly some place to go in the future, but not right now.
Thanks, Jason. Question for you, Geoff. If biodiversity is equally important, why allow pine trees in sheep pastures?
Sorry, what? Biodiversity is
equally important. Why allow pine trees in sheep pastures?
Why allow it? That's not. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment certainly would advocate for taking forestry out of the ETS entirely, and then what you effectively would then get is you'd have a carbon tax, which would generate an awful lot of revenue, and that could be used to fund things like biodiversity credits. There's a lot of talk about biodiversity credits. I guess the question is, where's the money going to come from? There's a lot of hope that there's going to be overseas purchases of it. We'd rather see a system which actually gets fossil fuel payers to pay for, effectively the recloaking Papatūānuku, recloaking erosion-prone areas, gullies, and all that sort of stuff in this difficult country in native forest.
Cool. Okay, now the last one I'm going to throw to you, Erica, to start with. Anyway, how can we overcome the mis and disinformation that is driving some industry groups and political groups?
That's an easy one. Thanks, Trace. I would take the scientific approach to this because I've read a bit of literature about it, and there is a point where once people have gone down a rabbit hole past a certain point, you can't get them out again. So for some people, nothing is the answer, which kind of leads me to the point that we need to champion the people that are not in that situation, and we need to be consistent with our messaging. And I think coming back to the earlier questions around leadership from our industry bodies is not running and hiding from these hard discussions, but actually continually fronting up, listening to farmers and hearing the questions they're asking, and just giving them a factual answer in a context, in a way that makes sense to them. And I do that in multiple 2,000 times at least, and across numerous questions. You've probably all answered them in the room. And when you just meet them where they're at, answer the question, and keep doing it, because this stuff's getting thrown at them by the algorithms all the time, you can make a difference. It's not easy though, and it requires consistent, hard effort.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Erica. We're just going to do a quick fire round. We haven't got a huge amount of time, but just a couple of, one or two key points from our panel. We'll start down with you, Malcolm. And this will help us set us up for the final session after our mini break. But if you consider a pathway to low emissions If you consider a pathway to a low emissions thriving primary sector in and well before 2050, what do you see as the biggest opportunity, or a couple of big opportunities?
I think this morning, if I could use it, George, if you don't mind, I've known George at the Mosses for 30 odd years, but this morning we saw a case study of a couple that have been on this journey. They've been good cockies for a long time, but they've been on this journey since 2019. That's how you timelined it. That business you described today has moved significantly in that period of time. Profitability, efficiency, talked about emissions intensity being reduced by 15%, talked about absolute reduction of 18%. What I see is that, I have been fortunate. I usually pause at the time I mentioned the fact that Jodie and I farmed through that period of cow growth. Those cow growth years were amazing. They fueled just about any and every opportunity that was about. I've just been in Canterbury last week, and I drove through Temuka and I drove through Ashburton, and those towns completely changed over time, with great respect to the previous land use. We now have an opportunity to bank the scale of dairy in New Zealand and just get on and do this better. One thing I'm absolutely adamant, and I will personalise this, that if Jodie and I's generation had the opportunity to milk cow growth, Kerwin's generation must not pay the price coming down the other side.
Nice. John?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add to that. I'm sorry, I missed the vast majority of the conference. We've got a 3,000-pound bird in the room at the moment that is down south. But I'm sure a lot of the conversations were had just mingling with people over a beer last night and just around lunch today. I didn't just turn up for the beer and for lunch, by the way. I got the idea that people were discussing the low-hanging fruit, and Malcolm went through them earlier in terms of the efficient cow. We, in the Science for Farmers platform last year at National Field Days, we had an activation board that I stole with impunity from my colleagues in Ireland to have a conversation with farmers around parts of the management system that either contribute to their greenhouse gas footprint or, done more efficiently, will reduce their greenhouse gas footprint. And met a lot of farmers coming through the door that had no interest in talking about greenhouse gases. We had a paddock in the middle of the tent with grass growing, so people kind of went, oh, grass, and wandered in. So we had a captive audience. But once we started talking to them about, you're a dairy farmer, cell count 250,000. If you could get that down to 75,000, you pull about 2 percentage units out of your greenhouse gas footprint. Absolutely no idea that was the case. If you've got a high prevalence of BVD and you're able to eradicate it off your farm, and I can tell you it's easy to do, you pull 5 to 10% of your greenhouse gas footprint out of your business. It's having those conversations in real things that are absolutely tangible, that farmers actually want to do anyway because they get better reproduction as a result of doing things like that. They care for their animals, and their animals are better because of it. So I think it's that. We've spent too long criticizing animal farmers because their animals emit methane. Well, that's a fact of life. They've been doing it for 50, 60 million years. How can we farm those animals a little bit better and actually pull those methane figures down? I think that's a key part of it. Do like to talk about, a patchwork of land uses across some of these things. A bit like Malcolm, I made I made a small fortune out of dairy farming through those growth years. Problem was I had to start with a large fortune. But if we could go back and do it again, we would do it differently. We sterilised the Canterbury Plains, and we were heavily criticised for doing it. A colleague of mine and I used to joke when we were criticised for taking out the trees. They were only pine trees.
John, you're going to have to wrap it
All right.
up.
Trees and centre pivots don't mix. That's not true. Pine trees and centre pivots don't mix. We didn't have to sterilise the landscape. And I think if we could go back 20 years, we'd do things differently. He's talking about banking the dairy footprint. I'm saying, no, I think we can put on a bigger show.
Yep. Okay. Has anyone else got anything they want to add in terms of a key opportunity?
Yes,
Erica?
but I know that
No, you go.
Shoot me with your eyes.
You'll keep it brief.
I think we need to, this is kind of an impossible thing to do, but to get politics out of the discussion and get back to the connection to land, animals, people and community. And we talk about in Ag First being land use agnostic, and this dairy versus sheep and beef, forestry versus sheep and beef. I'm really proud to be a farmer and a land manager and also be a rural professional that supports that sector. There is so much hope for us, so much so that we bought a farm last week, silly buggers that we are, another one. But we actually need to be focused on solutions on the ground up, and get all the rest of the crap out of the way and just get on with it.
Thanks, Erica.
Very briefly.
I'm going to get growled at shortly, but yeah go.
Just to tautoko what Erica said.
You're going to have to have a short afternoon tea, sorry guys.
The big opportunity we see is devolving environmental management down to local communities, and as long as they're making progress, leave them alone.
Okay, so that's a good place to end there. Just in terms of wrap up, it's been a great session. We've had some good challenge around complacency with some farmers, the lack of leadership from the sector. Malcolm, you've identified the kind of that repro opportunity in terms of the underutilised tool that farmers have got in their toolbox right now. John, you're talking my language around the need to put the farmer back at the centre of everything we do. There's some really good insights around the Mātou Whenua work, and what's relevant for Māori will be relevant for many other farmers, and we need to not lose track of that. Geoff, the role of carrots in terms of incentives, the criticality around getting the right policy settings so that we don't get unintended consequences. And then Erica, you've really identified this kind of mis and disinformation, the competition for our attention as farmers, and the need to meet farmers where they are and listen to them. And lead and allow them to lead. So thank you, Malcolm, John, Jason, Geoff and Erica, and I know you guys are going to be around in the next session. You've got a key role to play in that. It's been a really great opportunity. We've got one more session to go after this, so please don't run away. Farmers need you to help us solve this problem. So what we're going to do now, we're going to have a mini micro break. We're going to let you stand up, go shake hands with someone that you haven't met at the conference yet, and then we're going to get back underway. And we've got it as a workshop in the agenda, but I'm going to frame it up as an adoption hackathon because I reckon that sounds way more exciting and way less of you are going to leave because that's going to sound way cool to be part of. So we'll see you back in a few minutes. We'll just allow the team to get set up. Go shake hands with someone you haven't met.